Welcome to Season 2 of Robbie Burns and Friends. This season is all about my brand new book, Digital Organization Tips for Music Teachers, which is first in the Prestissimo series, a series of technology tip books for music educators, published by Oxford University Press. Each episode, I will discuss one chapter of the book with an expert on that subject. For example, on the episode about note-taking, I will chat with a music education specialist who is an expert on note-taking. The goal of the podcast is to offer complementary material, not simply a regurgitation of the content in the chapter being discussed. Think of these as kind of like a B-side of each chapter of the book, or even better yet, a counterpoint, complete with meta-discussion and even an extension of the ideas already in the book into new territory as provided by the experience of the guest. This week's guest is Ken Elpus. I'll let him explain a little bit about himself.
Hi, Robbie. I'm Ken Elpus. I am Associate Professor of Choral Music Education at the University of Maryland, College Park, where I direct one of the choirs. I'm not the choir director. I direct one of the primarily non-major ensembles, and I work with undergraduate students who want to be choral music educators in the public schools, and then I work with graduate students who are already music educators in the public schools and looking to get their master's or doctoral degrees.
Would you consider yourself a power user of your computing devices?
I think other people consider me that because I constantly get asked questions on many platforms about things that are going wrong. So I guess if we're going to go based on the perception of others, I would say yes. I have no problem sort of like poking around and trying to make the computer submit to my will when I'm trying to get something done. And I'm not afraid of breaking it. And I kind of have always had that attitude towards technology. So I think that sort of qualifies me as a power user, but I don't have like insane automated keyboard activated shortcuts to do everything for me. I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah, we might talk about that. The reason this sort of came about is we know each other. I studied at University of Maryland. I did my undergraduate and my master's degree there. And then we served for a couple of years on the Maryland Music Educators Association Executive Board. And I just found myself in those meetings kind of, and I do this, but like just kind of like in meetings while people have their laptops out and they're typing notes, just kind of like slowly leaning over your shoulder and just looking at the dock of your Mac and seeing what you're using. And every time being impressed about some other app I see on your dock that I'm like, I thought only I knew about that. There's another person in music education who knows about an app like, for example, Audio Hijack.
Yeah, actually, so Audio Hijack is a great app for a couple reasons. I first sort of started using Audio Hijack in a music teaching context as a way to record audio that might not otherwise be recordable. So, for example, if there is, like a really great high school choir, take when I was teaching high school choir, YouTube performance of a piece of music that I wanted to keep to use for teaching purposes, you could record the audio with Audio Hijack coming off of Safari and get like a fairly decent, MP3 or AAC file of this choir that, wasn't in a recording studio, wasn't in a recording session, just happened to have a parent with a halfway decent camera record their performance. And it was really good and worth sharing with my students, at least the audio portions of it, because the video often like will zoom in on the parent's kid. And I sometimes find that that's awkward to show students video of choirs taken by parents. So I would just use Audio Hijack to kind of extract the streaming audio coming off the YouTube video. And that was my first sort of foray into Audio Hijack as a piece of software, but it's gotten, over the years that I've been using it, considerably more powerful. I'm recording my half of our conversation right now using it by having it take the audio off of Skype and sort of filter through and make sure that my version of the file only has my voice so that then later you can go back and edit it and hopefully we'll sound like we're in the same room.
Yeah, that's one of the main purposes I use it. I also record a whole lot of, you can record an app's audio and save it as an MP3, and that's just like a nice little utility. And there are a lot of apps that can accomplish that goal, but Audio Hijack has this nice kind of visual user interface where your workflows, you're sort of dragging these little boxes into a grid and linking them together as your different steps of what exactly is happening. And It's super useful. It actually, I don't know if you noticed this, but you can actually you can like as blocks bring professional audio editing plugins into an audio hijack workflow.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
So I own a couple of like reverbs and equalizers that I use with Logic Pro, and like you can just drag those right into audio hijack. It's nuts.
Yeah, I think it's a great, it's just a great tool, and it's become more flexible since I started using it. Like it used to really only be able to sort of like take the audio from one app and then kind of record it. And now it has, yeah, just more processing features and more ability to sort of take and split and just kind of change things around. So yeah, it's a neat little Swiss Army tool app that you can use for audio that, yeah, I mean, I suppose you could also use it for piracy too, because theoretically you could record like off Spotify, but you wouldn't want to do that. It would be illegal.
It would be so illegal. Audio hijack is, I feel like it's part of a, this is a disclaimer worth sharing up front, because I feel like a lot of apps fall into, that we're going to talk about today, fall into this category. Like audio hijack it's a little bit, there's actually two things about it I want to say. The first is that like most of the productivity apps that we're going to talk about today, I find that they are typically, they're useful to me at first because I can see some sort of very specific problem or friction with my computer that specifically that app is going to solve, like that one thing. Like you were just describing your workflow with recording the YouTube video. Like that sounds like it was worth the price of admission to you. But the other end of it is like, yeah, Audio Hijack is kind of pricey. Like it's not a $2 app someone is going to buy. Most teachers I know will not even buy a $2 app on the Mac App Store.
Right.
So I mean, I think it's worth saying like for me, an app like this, I saw a very specific problem that it could solve for me, and that sounds like for you too. Like as I continue to use it and other apps of this class of sort of power apps, it continues to prove its worth to me over the years.
Yeah, I think that I'm willing to pay for something that's going to work well. I'm less willing to subscribe to something that's going to work well. Well, for some reason, the software as a service model I'm inherently distrustful of, and that could just be because I, started using computers at a time where you had to like physically go to a store and buy physical media shrink wrapped in a pretty box, and that felt like owning. Even though there was a license agreement that you didn't read when you installed it that said you didn't own it and you were licensing it, you still had this like physical thing in your possession that if you moved to a new computer or needed to reinstall, you could. I think those of us who remember those days maybe we're a little bit more resistant to subscribing to software, but a little bit less resistant to paying for it versus someone who's only known software as downloadable content, where I think it can feel more ephemeral and feel more like you're paying for something that ought to be free, even though there's a lot of work that goes into it and the creators deserve to be compensated.
Yeah, you explained that really well. That's come up in a couple of episodes recently, and it's a bummer. I mean, I'm kind of with you there. Like, I just recently I completely eliminated my need to have an Evernote subscription, which I know like people who have, if anyone in the state of Maryland is listening to this and has heard me speak, that's like the app that I talk about. I've completely decided to not renew my Evernote subscription, and I'm moving towards, I think iCloud Drive is like ready for me to rely on more heavily, so I'm not renewing Dropbox this year. And
Wow.
then, yeah, I know it's a real big step for me, and I'm feeling very good about it. And then the app that I'm editing these show notes that I'm going to post to the episode in now just announced last week that they're moving to a subscription model. And it's going to be
So I do. So that being said, I do subscribe to Dropbox. I do subscribe to Evernote. I don't see Evernote going away very much because I use it. I almost rarely use it actually for note taking per se. I use it more for storing things that I need later. So I do a fair amount, not a ton, but a fair amount of guest conducting or doing workshops at schools. And all of that income is 1099 income. So I have to sort of reconcile that with my accountant at the end of the year, make sure that it's all been reported correctly and not over-reported or under-reported. And I find that Evernote is really easy to just sort of like scan into and forget about it until it times to come, like do my taxes or send it off to the accountant or whatever. Dropbox is so inter-device reachable, and so inter-app operable, and just has been like, I started with the free 2 gigabytes of Dropbox that everyone else started with like however many years ago, which really worked as like a loss leader for them, because eventually it became so important to me, both as like a backup option, even though it's not my only backup option, and as a way to have access to all of my files and all of my devices, that it's just kind of there. And the 1 terabyte subscription is way larger than I need, I think. So we've set up selective sync so that my computer and my wife's computer share the same Dropbox account. We just have basically 2 master folders in the top. One is called Ken's Dropbox and one is called Becca's Dropbox. And Ken's Dropbox only syncs to my computer and Becca's Dropbox only syncs to her computer. And so we have the ability to both sort of take advantage of the service that we're paying for, which I feel like iCloud is more restrictive with your Apple ID and sharing of the service.
In the fall, the new operating systems that are coming out for every Apple device are going to actually allow you to do iCloud family sharing.
Okay.
Which is kind of nice. It'll work for the photo library. It'll work for your file hierarchy. It'll work for I think the music library already does it. But
so services I do pay for. We do pay for storage on Dropbox. We do pay for the 99-cent tier of iCloud storage for both my wife and I, for strictly for backing up the phone. And then we do pay for Evernote because, again, we've set up Evernote where we both have our own little corner of it.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So your Evernote is really good at allowing you to. It provides a lot of tools for you to just get stuff into it. Like the Pro account you can email an email into your Evernote library. You can clip a website into your Evernote database, and like it can retain the exact look and feel of the HTML on the page. The reason why I am moving away from it is I just don't feel like it's that elegant. But I admit that some of those power features are really helpful, especially like for the specific use case that you're using them for. I think that your professional career kind of like lends itself towards maybe more diverse or interesting needs of some of this software. So I'm curious, like what are some things, either apps or services that you're using that you feel like are helping you do your job?
Yeah, that's a great question. My job especially, I feel like, has very segmented responsibilities and parts. So the part that's going to be most similar to any music teacher is obviously the ensemble directing, or at least a secondary music teacher, I should say. Because the work that I'm doing with the University Treble Choir at Maryland is exceedingly similar to the work that I was doing in my K-12 teaching when I was teaching in high school in New Jersey. Although I have the benefit of our amazing choral administrator who handles a lot of the back end work that music teachers have to do if you're in the K-12 situation. So things like graphic design, or scheduling space, or liaising with students to gather information or just disseminate information, like a lot of those functions fortunately are handled by our choral administrator. So there's some fewer things that I'm doing compared to what I was doing in K-12 teaching. So there's the ensemble directing part or segment of my job. Then there's the undergrad teaching, which is probably similar to most university teaching. I'm fortunate to have really small class sizes, but beyond that, I don't see it as fundamentally different than what most of my colleagues are doing in the university. Then there's the service aspect of what we do, which is sort of our committee work and the various and sundry things that faculty are called upon to do to help kind of do the work of the university. And in the School of Music at Maryland, for example, there's a committee that sort of oversees the undergraduate curriculum programs and courses. There's a committee that oversees the graduate curriculum program and courses. There is an advisory committee that helps the director of the School of Music shape policies that are going to affect everybody. I'm also now serving a term on the University Senate, which is the sort of shared governance for the entire university, that any major change no matter how small, it actually impacts. Eventually, a version of that proposal will filter its way all the way up through the University Senate for an up or down vote. So there's that sort of service piece of it. Then there is, let's see, so undergrad teaching, service piece, ensemble directing. Then there is the sort of external service piece. As a music education professor, I very much enjoy like working with K-12 teachers and doing sort of professional development workshops for teachers, helping them kind of solve issues or problems that they are encountering. And that is often by going to school districts. In Maryland here, all the school districts are county-based. And so the music teachers are fortunate in that sometimes since there are so many music teachers in one district, the district will occasionally bring in an external professional development experience for them. So I'll go to, say, Howard County and do a presentation for 18 to 20 middle school teachers, or I'm actually going to Baltimore County, for example, just before school starts and doing like a district-wide thing for their choral teachers as well. And then there's also adjudicating. I guess in this realm, I would put like adjudicating and guest conducting, and that sort of stuff. And then on top of that, there's what the university actually pays me to do, which is to write and publish research. So now that I've said those things all out loud, it does feel like a lot. and I guess the biggest thing that I use to do my job is my calendar, and I've gotten really good about making sure the first thing I do in the morning is actually check the list of things that I'm supposed to do and where I'm supposed to be, because for the most part my teaching schedule stays pretty solid. I know when my classes meet, I know where they meet, but as part of that, I do student-teacher observations. So on some days when I may not have classes scheduled, or I have a lot of time for classes scheduled, I may have slotted in a student-teacher observation, which means I have to drive to some secondary school somewhere in the state of Maryland. And so in the calendar, I put in the address of where I'm going. So I get from Waze, which is a great GPS app, a notification usually the night before about what time I should get up and leave to actually make the student teaching observation on time, because it'll figure out the travel time. And Waze, of course, has crowdsourced traffic data, and traffic in Maryland is really bad, and there are a lot of Waze users that use it. So it's quite accurate, I find, in Maryland, considerably more accurate than if I go visit my family out in the Midwest, for example. There's maybe 2 Waze users where we're driving. I mean, it still gets you there, but it may not know anything about whether there's traffic or not. So calendar linked into Waze. So I put locations and everything that's not going to be on campus. I also do put my parking, the location of the parking deck that I park in, when I have a meeting early in the morning or a class early in the morning, so that I also get that same notification as to when to leave. Because not having a straight 9 to 5 or even a secondary school day that's regular, I could get stuck doing email at my desk at home and then not get to the car on time to make my class or make a meeting. So I actually do even put in my office address for meeting locations so that I know to get in the car and actually go there. So that's the biggie. That kind of helps me run everything. And so both on the Mac and on the iOS devices, I use Fantastical, which I know you've talked about before. The Mac version of Fantastical is really pretty. I like the way it looks. I like how easy it is to sort of add events with a little plus key and use natural language. The iOS application on the phone is really good. On the iPad, I almost never actually use it because I want it to look like the Mac version on the iPad screen, and it doesn't. It looks like a sort of expanded version of the iPhone screen, and I just kind of want to see something that looks like a calendar that I've written in. Yeah, so that's sort of scheduling stuff. I can sort of talk about some of those segments and the individual apps that I use for those sort of segments of the jobs, and then people can kind of fast forward if it's something that's not interesting. If you'd like to hear about that.
Yeah, I would love to hear about it.
All right, so I'll talk about just overall kind of task stuff because a lot of what I do is project based. So both the ensemble directing and guest conducting and research, I do consider a lot of those things to be projects. And so I use Omnifocus to keep track of that, which is a task manager that I know you've talked about before, and I know is in your book. And I have this love-hate relationship with Omnifocus.
Me too.
I go through stages where I like forget to put something into OmniFocus, but remember that I have to do it, which is like not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get that stuff out of your mind. I
Right.
know. Like just yesterday, I had a due date for slides. I'm on a panel presentation at the Arts Education Partnership with a couple other researchers who are arts education researchers who've gotten funding for their research from the National Endowment for the Arts. So I'm on a panel with the director of research for the National Endowment for the Arts, and several other researchers, actually from various fields, who've done NEA-funded research, and we're sort of talking about our work, specifically in the arts education sphere, and how that NEA supports us. And because this is a joint presentation, we all had to have our slides in well in advance because they want to like assemble them together. And I had to use PowerPoint, which was okay. I started in Keynote, and then I exported to PowerPoint and kind of fixed it up because I just generally prefer Keynote nowadays. But I've known that I've had to have these slides for a while, and I knew I had to do it yesterday because yesterday was the time that I had set aside to do it. But actually making the slides did not ever appear in my OmniFocus list at all. So that was probably a little less than ideal. The other issue sometimes is when I get really good with capture, then I'm not always really good about looking at OmniFocus first thing in the morning because I look at my calendar first thing in the morning. And so I've set up OmniFocus when I start my computer to open, like, and actually be visible, like not to start minimized. Of course, that only works if I'm turning on the computer from a shutdown and not waking it from sleep. So if I turn on the computer in the morning, it's the first thing I do, OmniFocus shows up, and then I actually look at it. And I have a couple different like views or perspectives, I think is what OmniFocus uses to sort of talk about that, to kind of filter through the list. And essentially what I've created is a view that says work plan and a view that says personal plan. And so anything that's categorized as a work project or task, and I have those separated into like research, teaching, service, and other professional for like all the external stuff. Shows up in this work plan, and then I use the flagging feature from that list to flag it, and then anything that's flagged goes to a perspective called today. And so then I switch to the perspective called today and actually try to like work through the things that I think I'm going to get done today. And then if I don't get it done today, or I don't think I'm going to get it done tomorrow, I unflag it and it goes away from the today perspective and it's always visible in the plan perspective, whether it's flagged or not. And then I also have another version of that for personal plan for things like taking my car to get the oil changed or mowing the lawn or whatever. Although usually like mowing the lawn never also makes it to OmniFocus because I look outside and I'm like, oh, I need to mow the lawn. But that stuff's on like a personal plan. And then same thing, it shows up and filters through to the today list if I flag it. And that's kind of how I use OmniFocus when I use OmniFocus. And I'm just always trying to get better about it because I feel like I just need to be.
I was going to give you an alternative app recommendation. I also use OmniFocus and have a love-hate relationship to it, but it sounds like what you find difficult about using OmniFocus would not be solved by
Right.
this app.
No, it's not the interacting with the app. It's the remembering to
Right.
engage with the app.
My problem is always on the back end. It's like, well, okay, if I overcommit and I have too many things that are impossible to do in a day, or if I'm just poorly motivated, it doesn't matter that I use an app that organizes it all. It's not going to get done unless I actually buckle down.
And do it. Yeah. And so like I'm looking at my today list right now, which has stuff that I did not flag this morning and has stuff that I flagged a while. I have to call JW Pepper because I'm giving a presentation at ACDA and I want them to give us music for free. So I'm going to ask them about that. I've had that flagged for like a week. I'm not going to do it today. It's on my today list, but I know I'm not going to do that today.
Yeah.
I have to register for a conference. I mean, I know that'll take just a short period of time. So I'll keep that on. Yeah, I don't even really use my system the way I should use my system. I guess it's the problem.
Well,
But yeah, go
OmniFocus
ahead.
supports like dates setting a date that you should be working on something, and then a date that actually is due by like a hard deadline. So it seems like you're just flagging stuff as important, or are you actually using the view where it's like, because you can set it so that it's a calendar view and you see what things you have to do on each day?
Yeah, the forecast view. I do use defer dates for things that I know I'm not going to do right away. So, for example, like I have an email that I send out to students who are registered in all of my classes about a week before classes start, and I give them, like if the course site is open, we use a course management system called Canvas. Our local implementation of Canvas is called Elms, but it's just Canvas, Instructures Canvas. I will usually publish the Canvas site in advance of the semester starting so that students can kind of go in and kick the tires and see. Some classes have more intense Canvas stuff than others. I don't like to collect any assignments on paper anymore. I actually refuse to, except for one project that my juniors have to do. So I use Canvas pretty extensively as a place to store all the work for grading and evaluating. And I put my syllabi up there. So, like, for example, in the welcome email, it's like, hey, Canvas is open, or Elms is what we would call it. Elms is open and the syllabus is up there, so you can look at the syllabus. And then I also include, I'm a little bit nice about books. I mean, I like, there are a lot of textbook resources that I think are important for our students to sort of be aware of and to use in the courses. Sometimes people will say I assign too many textbooks, but I do try to figure out where they're cheapest, and I'll send in that welcome email. I'll send links like, oh, here's an Amazon link. It's cheaper here than it is at the bookstore on campus, or like, hey, I saw it's on half.com or whatever. So like it's kind of like books and materials they need for the class. It's like, hey, this is what the class is about, and by the way, the Canvas site is open, so go kick it out. And I have the text of most of those emails, because it changes, slightly, but not a lot, in Evernote. And so I have an Omnifocus recurring task that's deferred to just before the semester to send those welcome emails. And then I go to Evernote, I cut and paste the old version, or I actually edit it in Evernote to what it's like, the new things, whatever's changed. And then I cut and paste it into an email. So like I do use defer dates for things like that, but I actually like having the sort of planning perspective versus the today perspective, because I want to be able to have that active, like I theoretically want to be able to decide like, okay, what is it I'm going to do today? And during the academic year, I think I'm a little bit better about that than during the summer. Summer gets very loose,
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I could do this work thing, or I could play Splatoon with my kids. Or like, oh, I could do this work thing, or I could go to the pool with my family. So, often the family time wins out.
Yeah. That's awesome. Okay. So yeah, and OmniFocus is a really good app. I'll put a link in the show notes to where someone could learn more about that. Yeah, I find, and not to harp on OmniFocus too much, there's a whole episode in this series about task management. What I find about it is that for some people, it's got a lot of overhead. Like it's a fairly complex app for someone who's looking for something a little more basic, and a really good alternative that is also kind of a premium price tag, but that is far more elegant and friendly and easy to use, is an app called Things,
Mm-hmm.
which I actually did buy the new version of that was just released this summer. And it is really pretty, and it erases a lot of the visual noise that OmniFocus brings. It sounds like that's not so much bothering you as much as just trying to figure out how to best use the app, like how to actually commit to using the app that that you want to use it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's I get notifications from my calendar, like wherever I am. It's like getting a woof. Like if I have an appointment coming up, that was a reference to The Office, by the way. So I get like the calendar I can't avoid. I've turned off notifications on my phone for email, but the calendar I can't avoid, and OmniFocus I just can't avoid.
Yeah. Makes sense. It's tough.
Yeah.
It's and between OmniFocus and email. I'm curious to talk about email for a hot second.
Sure.
Between those two, I find that most of my getting stuff done really boils down to those two apps. And I'm always doing this weird dance between the two, because you can actually forward an email that is task related into Omnifocus as a task, and it'll like in the note related to the task will be the body of the email. I struggle with this a lot because I sometimes don't ever even get to my Omnifocus list because I'm actually just getting through the email step, and there's just so much of it to deal with. And sometimes I have like a planning period, but not really even that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have, right, in the K-12 aspect, right, you have, or the context, you have like you have your time that you have to not be in front of students, and it's limited. And so you have to really like plan what to do. Um, there are some days where I'm in my office, like working on stuff for a while. And so email is always a temptation to suck the time of my day away. I've gotten a little bit better in a couple ways. So the first thing is that my email app of choice, and I know there's like huge debates and wars about email apps, is an app called Unibox, which, is a little bit older now. It's a few years old. It doesn't really get updated very often, but there's not too much that I wish it would do, except maybe have like direct OmniFocus integration instead of having to forward. But the best thing I like about it is that it organizes the email by contact, so not by subject. And so, like, I have a colleague who I've worked with on some joint projects who's at another university, who never like writes a new email to someone. It's like the subject line of any email I get from this particular colleague is always just whatever some random subject email I sent a long time ago, because I am like obsessive about having subject lines match the subject of the email. And so we'll go back and forth in these chains where the subject lines are irrelevant because he just replied to an email instead of writing a new email to me, even if it's on a new topic. And it wasn't this particular person that made me like Unibox, but Unibox works by having a list of contacts in the left-hand column, not a list of emails. And so when someone emails me, like a student, their name goes to the top of that inbox list. And then when I click on their name, I see the email that they just sent me. And underneath it, I see our entire history of correspondence, every single email that we have ever traded, regardless of subject, almost in like a threaded message view. And I love it. I've not found any other email software that works this way. And it's just for on the desktop, if I need to scroll back to make sure, like, no, I actually did say that to you like 3 years ago or whatever, I have it there. It's for students in the ensemble who are not music majors. This is sometimes funny because I could go back, like, and they're sending me an email, and I could go back through our chain and realize that anytime they've ever emailed me, it was because they were missing a rehearsal. For various and sundry reasons, and I can see all of the reasons. And it just comes up. And that way of structuring things, at least on the desktop, I find very useful, very helpful, and very just like reassuring. Saves me a lot of searching, right? And also, oftentimes, I think my one colleague is probably not the only person who uses irrelevant subject lines. So it sort of takes that whole thing out of the equation. And the other thing is the subject of the email that I'm receiving is almost never what's going to determine whether or not it's important enough for me to read. It's usually the person who's sending it. So that sort of helped a lot. And then that I do this because I think you might have referred me to it, but I also use SaneBox to pretty aggressively filter my email. And for my work email, I use the straight up vanilla version of SaneBox. This is another subscription service. But what it does is you give it IMAP access to your email, and it goes through and uses like machine learning to kind of figure out who you've actually corresponded with in the past. It kind of goes through your entire archive, theoretically only using the metadata. That doesn't bother me. It just doesn't bother me for them to have access to my metadata because it's so useful. I know for some people it would. And so anyone who I've corresponded with in the past, when they send me an email, they get moved into my inbox, and I actually see that email right away. And then anyone I haven't corresponded to with in the past goes into a separate folder called Sane Later. for my work email, also insane later are things like academic spam. So the first time you publish an article in an academic journal, you start receiving invitations to publish in all of these predatory journals, which are basically like open access journals that aren't really reputable but charge an article publishing fee, and like they basically are trying to prey upon the need of academics to publish, which is why they're called predatory. But so all of the like academic spam emails go into Sane Later. The one thing that then will go into Sane Later that I do have to check it for, I can't just ignore that box, are people who are emailing me for the first time, which could be new students. It could be people who are interested in our graduate program. It could be someone who has read something that I've written and wants to know more about it. It could be someone who's inviting me to come do a guest conducting gig. So I don't ignore my Sane Later box. I go through it once a day or once every other day or so, and get back to those people. But it's really easy to just, if I know something's been filtered to Sane Later and it even remotely looks like it's something that doesn't take any time, I just delete it without even looking at it. And I can do that on my iPad, just like swipe through. I use Spark for my work email on iOS devices, and just like I'll go through my Sane Later box and just swipe through and archive, delete, or swipe it back over to the inbox. I don't like the iOS implementation of Unibox. It just doesn't, with the limited screen real estate, it doesn't work as well.
Interesting. So when you were talking about it, and I've downloaded it and set it up since you were talking, it actually sounded like an app that would be ideal on the iPhone, where you don't want all of this extra noise in front of you when you're looking at it. Almost like it sounds like it feels like more of a messaging app than it does an email app.
Yeah. Oh, and so speaking of a messaging app, the other thing that's really helped manage work is the music education department. Our graduate students and our faculty are on Slack.
Yes.
So we use Slack to communicate with each other about things that used to be long CC'd email chains. We all have it on our phones. We all have it on our desktop. And it has freed up my email box immensely, because sometimes, like, if there's a thing going on that primarily impacts the instrumental music education students, my two instrumental colleagues need to talk about it, and they CC me on it because I just kind of need to be aware of it, right? I would never chime in on those conversations, and it would just fill my email inbox. And now that stuff's all in Slack, and so I'm still aware of what they're talking about. They don't expect me to chime in. The history of all of our chats are saved. It's more fun because it feels less formal. And we can get in contact with each other. If we just, the worst is like when you need an answer to a quick question and you have to send an email, because then you're at the mercy of when that email gets processed. But with Slack, if we have a quick question, we usually get a response within 10 minutes. You know, it's like getting a text message. We share files over Slack. We've actually cut down on the number of divisional meetings that we have, because we can get a lot of that work that we would have done face-to-face in Slack. So I can see a use for it for K-12 teachers too. Like, I can see like a music department, if you have an instrumental or a band person, an orchestra person, a choir person, and maybe a general person, you know, in one building, like using Slack to just sort of like keep tabs on each other without having to email each other constantly, is to keep that email for free from memos from administrators or, you know, conversations with parents. For us, it's been like tremendously useful.
My music team of 4 does use Slack, and we find it useful for all of the same reasons. It just takes that cruft of formality out of email. It's got like lots of great like power features too. I mean, the whole paradigm is based on creating channels, which are sort of like tags that you can use to filter specific conversation threads. So like we have now one conversation thread for Hershey Park trip planning. We have a conversation thread that's just the people who teach winds and percussion. We have one that's just people who teach strings, one for just symphony orchestra, one for jazz band, one for sharing files, like just all these specific channels. And you can set on your phone, which I love, like snooze and do not disturb features on a per thread channel. So I can get crazy gifts from the choir director at like 10 p.m., but I don't necessarily have to respond about like looking over the latest itinerary for Hershey Park.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, we have sub-channels set up for faculty. We have one set up for all of our graduate assistants, so that we can communicate with them and they can communicate with each other about like office work. We have one just for our doctoral students and the faculty because we meet with them every other week for like a little doctoral colloquium, which is kind of like a little professional induction kind of class. Yeah, it's great. We haven't there was an initial part when we started using it where we thought maybe we would have all of our undergrad students sign up too and create channels for them to communicate with each other and as a way for us to communicate with them. We decided not to do that, and instead we just use Remind to sort of text them, because you cannot send an email with important information to someone who was born after 1997. Like, it just isn't, it's not really useful. So Remind has its limitations and isn't great. The first one being that it has to be like an opt-in. The students have to opt in, but we actually find that information gets out better when they just get a text message than any other way that we've used.
Yeah, I'll put Remind in the show notes. That's a good one. Really useful. I know a ton of teachers who use Remind. I do not personally use it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it originally started as a way for you to be able to text your kids without them seeing your phone number, because that was weird, right? When texting was still relatively new. It's probably still weird for some people who are teachers to text their students. Remind has now added two-way messaging, though, so it's kind of exactly the same thing. It's texting now. Like, it's no longer one-way broadcast. Like, students can reach the teacher through Remind, which is the same as them texting you. I mean, I guess there's some sort of, central third-party place where that's going to translate it. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's useful.
Yeah, my music team set up a Google Voice account last year, and I love it. We actually can solve some of those problems more so with the parent end. I really struggle with using the office phone, and I also don't have a phone that can dial out in every one of the 5 rooms that I teach in on an average day. So one of the things we do with this Google Voice account is we use it. We use it at Hershey Park. It actually can be linked to all of our personal cell phone numbers. A parent can get a number that's not our number, call it in an emergency in the park, and then it will ring all of the directors' phones, and whoever picks it up first just gets to have the conversation.
That's actually a great idea.
It's really super. Now, what I also use it for is if I'm not in a room that is near the phone, the one music phone that can call out, or if I just need some more privacy or something, I will, or if I'm having phone trouble, which is often, I'll just call parents from the Google Voice, and then if they want to call me on the Google Voice, I have it set so that like during school hours it will notify my phone, and then after that it will not.
That's so it's like you've created an office phone, like a mobile office phone.
And I put it in my email signature too, like Ellicott Mills music phone. I don't know if that's like against Howard County policy, but no one said anything yet.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine giving your parents a way to contact you is going to be against the policy.
Yeah. All right. Well, wow.
Maybe it is.
Right.
All right. So we've talked about communication, calendaring, team stuff. What would you like to hear about next?
Well, on the one hand, like the ensemble directing part of your job would probably connect with teachers listening to this the most.
Yeah. Okay. So cool things I do for the ensemble directing. Probably the coolest thing that I did was I have a student assistant who takes attendance, which I know people have mixed feelings about. I know some teachers are like, no, I have to do it because it's my legal responsibility. Some don't maybe trust their students to do it. Some will have like section leaders do it and then filter it back to the teacher, and the teacher will enter it into the actual official computer system. We don't have an official computer system for attendance taking at the university. It's just something that each instructor is expected to do on their own. We're certainly expected to do it, but it's more about justifying grades if grades are to be challenged or things like that. It's less about a legal requirement for the student to be there in the way it is in the K-12 context. But I have a student assistant who does the attendance. And so once I create a seating chart, and usually after ad drop is over, I will go in and I create a Google form that has each student's name, and it's almost like a survey. And then there's a set of bubble, like, choose one radio buttons. And it defaults to present, and then the other options are absent, late, or excused, because in my ensemble, sometimes students have scheduling conflicts where they actually have another class that meets across one of our ensemble times. And because this isn't the premier ensemble of the university, they are allowed to sort of schedule around some scheduling conflicts where maybe they'll miss one rehearsal of our 3 a week. That does not happen in the premier ensemble, of course. But so when school form goes into a Google spreadsheet that will summarize the absences, conditionally code, like whether it says present, absent. So like if it's absent, there'll be like a little red, the block will go red for that student for that day. And the way that she has the link, she's the only one with the link to the Google form. And then the student ensemble assistant just reopens it every day. It creates a new line. And so the columns are each student, and the rows of the spreadsheet are the days. And the cell that co-locates the student and the ensemble rehearsal day says whether they were present, absent, excused, or whatnot. So that's a neat little thing. And it's possible too, if you're having students do that for you, they could do that electronically, and then you could enter it into your school system. It would be essentially identical to them doing it on paper and handing it to you, except you just have this running spreadsheet of the attendance. Then repertoire things. So I do use an Evernote to keep track of every piece of music that I program or am interested in programming. And it's just a running Evernote of ideas for the future that are sort of separated out by the type of ensemble. So my primary ensemble is a treble group, so I'm doing mostly music for soprano and alto voices. And that's often, like, that's my longest list of like things that I want to do in the future and things that I've heard and places where I heard them. Sometimes I'll throw in a link to a YouTube video if there is one, or the name of a recording if there's been a recording made, or like if I heard it at an ACDA, I'll write down which ACDA and what group it was so I can go find it later. Then as I do pieces, in that note, I write when I did it, and then I also move it into a separate note that says past repertoire. So I have like one that's repertoire ideas and one that's like past repertoire. I don't delete it out of the repertoire ideas one, even after I've done it. I just sort of like write a note that I did it and when. And then I also have other things. So sometimes I'll do like a middle school honor choir, or I'll be asked to do that. That's going to be like a specific level of repertoire. Often that's either easy SATB 4-part mixed music or SAB music 3-part mixed music. And so I have like running lists of those. That's often the hardest thing to find, is like really, really, really great literature that's accessible to advanced middle school singers, just because it's sort of like the biological state of being of a middle school singer.
Yep.
And then I have another one for high school level groups. Sometimes I'll do high school level honor choirs. And even within those, I have like gradations of difficulty of stuff that I've listened to or that I'm interested in doing, because like in all state, certainly you can pretty much do anything because they're large enough that even if it's really difficult, there'll be enough kids in there that can do it, certainly at an all-state level, that it'll fly. But sometimes like a smaller honor choir, like a region or a district or an all-county, may have some students in it that, aren't going to get to all-state and don't have those all-state chops. And so you need stuff that's going to challenge them but not be over their heads. And so I just basically keep track of all that in Evernote. And then as I am asked to create a program, the first place I go is that Evernote. I listen to a ton of choral music on YouTube and Spotify to broaden my sort of like awareness of what's going on right now. There used to be like a bigger market for buying things on physical CD. Usually you would do that at like choir director conventions. I can't remember the last time I bought a CD. It was maybe a couple years ago. And even then, like I buy the CD at the convention, I go to my hotel room and I put it onto my Mac, like I rip it onto my Mac almost immediately.
Yeah.
The actual running of the ensemble, I'm still pretty analog. I mark up my scores with pencils, colored pencils, and regular pencil in rehearsal. Keep everything in a 3-ring binder. I know you were on the iPad for that, and I don't have the big iPad. And I really like going through stuff with colored pencil. Like, it really helps me study the scores. And so I suppose I could get to a point where I could like scan it into a program like Fourscore or something like that after I've done the like physical work with the colored pencils and the rulers that I like to do. Um, I don't know. I might, when the new big iPad comes out, maybe I'll try to buy a cheap used old one because I would only use the big one for music. Um, I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know if it works.
Fourscore is really great about that stuff. You can definitely do the colored pencil thing.
Hmm.
I have to say, like it's like a lot of these apps. Fourscore is the payoff is so much bigger once you've really got a considerable part of your library inside of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm in the phase now where it's just mostly payoff because so many, and I've been teaching only for 7 years, but like I'm starting to like repeat repertoire that I have done, and I'm just like, okay, it's time to go ahead and scan that piece of music and then import it into Fourscore, do that whole dance, and then I just go into my Google Drive, which is where that's like how my school district uses. That's like our work bucket of stuff, and I'm just like, whoa, this is already in here. It's in Fourscore,
Mm,
ready to search,
yeah.
and so it's not bad. I miss the tangibility of paper though. Something about it, like just scribbling in pencil and like using little yellow sticky notes,
Yeah.
sticking those in the score. I do miss that. It feels really good. I had a moment last year where I really had to like buckle down on a piece that I was working on. It just didn't feel like I was connecting it to the students in a way that I wanted to. And for me, and this is sort of, I'm going in a different nerdy direction now, but for me, like if I get stuck in that place, strangely, the musical point that I sort of like my starting point is to just analyze the harmony.
Hmm.
And I was like, gosh, this is really cumbersome on Fourscore to like write in chord symbols underneath,
Yeah.
so what I did is I made a little, like a really thin, opaque, black writing tool. You can customize the writing tools, and it's kind of like a pencil.
Okay.
And I just zoomed in really close, and it kind of did the job for me. And when I was done, I realized, oh, actually, Fourscore wasn't the problem. My motivation was the problem because once once I started actually like getting into it, I was like, oh, this is not so bad. This is just like paper.
So how the size of a band score, right? Because the choral scores are like, octavo size. They're, like a large trade paperback, right? Um, the size of a band score on the big iPad, you don't find it's too small. I'm also blind. Like I have my eyes are terrible.
Yeah, it's tough, I guess, in that situation. But I'm okay. Like I'm never learning the notes on the podium.
Right.
And if I really need to check something, I just zoom in, and it really doesn't take that long. I just zoom in, zoom out. It's a 2-finger pinch, and I'm doing more of the prep at home. I'm just kind of glancing at where I am in the score. So I find that it's very comfortable for me to do on an everyday basis.
I do like it. I use it a lot. I use it more than I've used previous iPads, mostly for the pencil. I use GoodNotes to annotate PDFs a lot, mostly for grading purposes. So, like I said, I get all of my um, everything that students submit is electronic in Canvas. I pull it down from Canvas into PDF, annotate it in GoodNotes, just like I'm grading it, and then send it back to the students as a PDF. The other thing I do is sometimes I have to review journal articles for publication, like do the peer review part of the science part of research. And I have moved entirely into reading those manuscripts on GoodNotes and notating them freeform handwriting, and then going back to my Mac to sit down to actually type up the peer review report, based entirely on the notes that I scribbled, through the manuscript, so that the authors get fairly decent feedback from me, kind of in the order that they've written the paper. And that way I can read it away from the Mac. I can read it, if I'm lying in my bed, or if I'm sitting at my desk, or if I'm sitting on the couch or whatever. I can do that piece of it without having to sit at the computer. And just other little things that are convenient, discussion boards on Canvas and stuff like that. That's really easy to do on the iPad. And then obviously like typical media consumption as well. So yeah, the 10.5 does look pretty good. I don't think I can spend the money right now.
Yep, that was where I ultimately arrived. An iPad has traditionally had a 3-year lifespan for me.
Yeah, that's probably pretty fair. I know my kids would like it because they enjoy when I am done with a device, and then they can like use it more freely. Although they're not allowed to have we're pretty strict about like no devices in our family. So like for kids, our kids are 7 and 9, soon to be 10 and 8. Although I guess about 6 months away from that. And they do not have their own anything. I have kids YouTube on my iPad, and like my daughter will sometimes do crafting with like how-to videos that are available on kids YouTube. She has to ask me, and I can say no. And then my son has some sports games and stuff like that on each of our phones, but again, he has to ask. And he actually recently saved up his own money for a long time, all like holiday gifts and birthday gifts and lemonade stand, to have enough to get the Nintendo Switch. Yeah. And so we had to spot him for the mandatory accessories for the Switch, like, extra controllers and games. But he did buy the console on his own, and it replaced a Wii U, although we still have the Wii U set up. And, we just essentially, in keeping with our no device rule for the children, are like, the Switch does not leave the dock. Like, it is as if it were a console. You cannot use it like a mobile device. And he doesn't.
We also bought a Switch this summer.
Yeah, it was Splatoon 2. The release date of Splatoon 2 drawing nigh, that I was like, he saved all his own money. And so we definitely, despite what you've read, the Switch is not a $300 purchase. But,
No.
but,
no.
He did. I mean, he had $300 that he had saved up, and it was the only thing he wanted to spend his money. Like every time, like we'd be, on vacation at the beach or something, and my daughter would want to be like, "Oh, can I use some of my money to get a souvenir, like to get a T-shirt or a sweatshirt or a little trinket?" We'd be like, "Yeah, sure." And we'd ask my son, and he'd be like, "Nope, saving up."
Nice.
So, yeah. All right. What else?
Okay, so one quick thing on GoodNotes, and then I think you were sort of transitioning into research, which I want to ask you about.
Sure.
GoodNotes is very, very similar to Notability in the features. I find that a lot of people in higher education really like GoodNotes. Is there a particular feature of the app that connects with you? If someone was like, all right, there's so many note apps on the App Store, like where do I start? What about GoodNotes?
So I only use GoodNotes for PDF annotation. And on like my old iPad 1, which I got while I was a doc student, and I got it specifically for reading PDFs, I used to use a program called iAnnotate, which was one of the first things like that. And then I moved from that to Goodreader. And for like straight up consumption, I actually still really like Goodreader a lot, even though it hasn't been updated in a long time. And they keep promising that at some point it's going to get updated. I feel like it has the best combination of reading and annotating if I'm going to do something like highlighting. But for like correcting and marking, for evaluative purposes, the handwriting on GoodNotes is way better than Goodreader. Goodreader, you have to go into the annotation mode and pick the tool and then do it. And GoodNotes, like, if you tell it you're on the pen or the pencil, you're on the pen or the pencil every time you bring the stylus up to it. And I use Apple Pencil as my stylus. And the handwriting recognition is great, and it even can turn handwriting into text if you need it to do that. The other thing it can do is it can in presentation mode, black out all of the user interface and only show either the note or the document or whatever it is that you're working on. So I've been looking for a long time for a solution like that, because in my vocal pedagogy class, I always teach one lecture where we are going through the anatomy of speech and voice and doing like intrinsic and extrinsic muscles and structures of the larynx. And it's important for someone who's going to be teaching singing to actually understand how the vocal mechanism works. Because if you're going to, diagnose and correct vocal issues in students, you should sort of have an understanding of what the physiology behind what's going on is, so you sort of know if what you're telling them is going to help at the root cause of the symptom that you're hearing. And as part of that, since it's a college level class, or sometimes I teach a graduate level version, it is important for you to actually like understand like these things all have names and they have specific functions and you need to know them. So we have a smart board in our classroom that I've used for this. So put up a like a Keynote or a PowerPoint slide on the Mac that's connected to the smart board, and then use the marker to write the name as we're talking about the part, and essentially annotate up this empty anatomical diagram with the names of the structures of the larynx. And the smartboard is actually terrible for this purpose. It, like, if you tap it in the wrong way, you advance the slide and then the ink goes away. If the cameras that control the smartboard, because it's not actually like a touch sensitive surface, it works on like triangulating where you're touching it by these, like, actually it's more than triangulating, but whatever, this like series of 4 cameras, those can very easily get out of alignment. The software is old and buggy, and it's no good. So from that, I started trying to annotate the slide on my iPad, because we have an Apple TV in that room specifically for AirPlay. So anyone with a Mac or an iOS device in that room can AirPlay to the Apple TV that is then connected to the same projector that the smartboard is on. You can't obviously use any of the internal smartboard features, but you at least have projection to the room. And the iOS Keynote has an annotation feature. It is terrible for the same reason. If your hand goes in the wrong place and the palm projection doesn't work, you exit out of the entire presentation and you lose all of the ink. And it's always this one lecture. I'm like, this is a simple thing I want to do. Why is this so frustrating? Please do not make me get an overhead projector from the closet. So GoodNotes finally allows me to actually do this lecture in a way where I don't feel like that teacher that doesn't understand anything about technology, because the students only see the document. They don't see any of the interface. The handwriting and palm projection with the Apple Pencil is 100%. Nothing ever, like, there's no like cutout, or sometimes with the smartboard, like you'd write something and like every few inches there'd be like a blank because it didn't register that the pen was down. None of that. It just works. And so those are my 2 use cases for GoodNotes. I actually don't use it as a note-taking device. I don't write handwritten notes on my iPad. I thought that might be something I would do, but I just don't. Yeah, I don't love the feeling of the writing on the glass. So if I need to do long form notes, I put it in like a Moleskine notebook, and then I take a picture of it and scan it to Evernote.
Yeah, I do that fairly often. Yeah. I do like the handwriting thing for really quick stuff. Actually, I'm running the iOS 11 beta on my iPad, and you can from the lock screen, all you have to do is just touch the Apple Pencil to the screen, and it just opens up a note, and you can just start scribbling.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, pretty neat. But yeah, sounds like you're using GoodNotes the same way I use Notability, which is it's just like an app that makes PDFs feel like a piece of paper.
Yep, exactly.
But GoodNotes has all that cool presentation stuff, which teachers like, and it also I think has better organization tools.
Yeah.
Yeah. So research. So what are you using?
Okay, so I do. So the research that I do tends to be quantitative in nature. And so there's some arts education researchers that do more the kind of research where you're interviewing people about their experiences on the qualitative side. I think that's really, really important work. It's just not the work that I do. I use a few different tools. The first thing is, if you are going to get a graduate degree where you're going to have to engage with research, you must get some sort of reference manager software, 100%. There is no one in 2017 who should be formatting a bibliography in APA format by hand. That is a waste of your time. The style manual is important because I think, showing that you can follow a style manual shows that there's a level of rigor in your work. I'm always more suspect if someone has obvious errors in APA style for an article I'm reviewing. Like if they can't follow a simple style manual, how can I trust that the science was done well? But in terms of actually like what's italicized and what's capitalized and where does a period go, this is what computers are for. Use a reference manager. There are two reference managers that I use. One is better than the other at certain things. So the one I primarily use is something called Papers. And Papers was originally designed to kind of be like iTunes for academic PDFs. So if you're in a graduate program and you have to download research, downloading the PDF is not the same as actually reading the article. But once you've downloaded the PDF, you end up with like many, 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 many PDFs of these various and sundry research studies. If you drag the PDF into a program like Papers, Papers will try to pull all the metadata it can and start organizing the papers by title and by source and by author. And then you can add your own keywords. You can also search by keyword in the full text of the article. And then essentially keep track of everything that you've read. There are some basic highlighting features in it as well. If you're reading at the Mac, there's an iOS version that's okay, but that it syncs to nicely so you can read and highlight on the go. It doesn't use the PDF standard annotation. It sort of lays it on top. It's almost like non-destructive editing of a photo. It keeps a separate metadata of where you've highlighted. So it's unfortunately proprietary if you do highlight within it, but it will display highlights that you've done in another program. And it is absolutely indispensable for keeping all of that stuff organized. I think if I open my papers library right now, and this is going back to before my dissertation. This is going back to stuff that I was reading even like for my master's degree. I don't know if it's going to tell me the number of papers that are in my library, but it's ridiculous. It will also keep track of books and book chapters, everything that you need. It's just all right there. You can make little subfolders of collections. I use the Smart Collection feature, so essentially they're like little folders that are not real folders. You have a set of criteria, and it creates the folder for you. If any paper that meets that criteria is in the folder, I use those in combination with keywords to sort of like partition out the library by whether something is an example I'm going to use for class, something for my own research, and then by topic. So Papers. Now, Papers also has a feature called Magic Citations, where if you are working in Word or in a few other apps, you can hit a shortcut key. I think it's Control twice or Function twice, whichever one of those is not does not bring up the dictation. And while you're in Word, it will bring up your Papers library. You can search for the paper by author and or by title or keyword or whatever. When you find it, you hit enter, and it inserts a little form code into your paper that you're writing, which is a link to that paper in your database. Then at the end of this, when you're done writing, you have all these little form codes in your Word document. You hit the shortcut key again and click Format Manuscript, and then all of those little form codes get replaced with the internal like parenthetical references that APA requires, or really whatever style you're using, because it does all of them. And then at the end, it creates the bibliography for you in the correct format using all of the papers. Now, the big issue with it is garbage in, garbage out. If your metadata is wrong, your bibliography is going to be wrong. And that includes things like the capitalization. So for example, APA requires sentence style capitalization for titles of books. If you have put title capitalization for a book into your papers library, meaning every major word is capitalized, it's going to carry that error through to your bibliography. So you do have to kind of think about some of those requirements as you're entering the metadata, but it can also pull down a lot of the metadata from the internet itself, because the journal publishers have created a system called digital object identifiers, or DOI, which are basically like serial numbers for scientific papers. And the serial number is essentially a persistent URL. So if you get the DOI of any academic paper ever, you can go to https://doi.org/ and then the DOI, and it will immediately take you to the version of record for that paper on the publisher's website, no matter where it is, or if the publisher changes their website structure. It's like a persistent URL. But that persistent URL is also registered with all of the metadata. So papers can pull down the metadata for you, just if you know the DOI. So yeah, so you solve two problems. You solve the formatting problem, and you solve the issue of having a reference in your bibliography that was not actually cited in the paper, or having a citation in the paper that doesn't have an entry in the bibliography. Those are the two most common things I see with students when they make bibliography errors, besides formatting, is they cite a paper and forget to put it in the bibliography, or put a paper in the bibliography that's not actually cited in the paper. But like I said, no one should be doing this by hand anymore. Yeah, so love papers. Papers also will drop those, they call them site keys, those little codes, into other word processing programs or writing programs. If I'm working on a very large project, I actually don't ever start in Word. I start in Scrivener, which is a great app for managing really large writing projects, because you sort of can start with the outline on the left-hand column, and then really think about the structure of your writing, and then essentially pick a subsection of the writing and start writing. So you don't need to start at the beginning. You can actually start anywhere. And I often find the beginning of some of the things I'm writing research-wise is harder to write than, for example, the method section. I know what I did. I know what my research questions were. I know how to document what I did. It's all pretty straightforward. There's not much creativity in that. There's certainly flair and style of writing, so it's not dry and terrible to read, but it's more formulaic. So I often will start with the methods and the results, and then once I've really written those sections and know how they're going to flow, I find the introduction is easier to write. So then I'll go and Scrivener back up to the introduction. If I'm doing really large writing, like a grant application, I just did a giant grant application this summer, which was actually a resubmission because we'd gotten some really great feedback. The working in Scrivener helps me perfect each section and then put it all together. And Scrivener also has that kind of computer programmer or developers view of things, where it's like you're doing all this work and then you compile it to whatever you need it to be. And so, for example, once you've got it in Scrivener and it's sort of ready to go, you can compile it to Word, which is usually what I do. And then in Word is where you can actually do that formatting of the bibliography from papers. So papers will drop the keys, the little form codes, into the Scrivener writing, but it can't use Scrivener to format the bibliography. You do have to export to Word to do that. But there's no problem with that, because pretty much the whole publishing world works on Word documents anyway, as I'm sure you found with your book at Oxford. You have to send them Word files.
Yep. But I wrote it in Scrivener, and I did exactly that. I just exported the whole thing as a Word document.
Yeah. The only challenge becomes when Scrivener isn't really ideal for collaborating, because there's not really a good collaboration tool. But Word is also terrible for collaborating. When I have to send people Word documents and they send me back track changes or commented Word files, I hate that. I just hate it. I hate it partially because when I'm making comments in a Word file, I know there's a date and timestamp, and sometimes I don't want people to see I commented on this 2 minutes before I sent it to you, or I was up at 1 a.m. doing these comments. I hate that, and there's no way to turn it off that I've found. And it gets very frustrating. The worst is when you have to delete something that someone has commented on, because if you have to totally delete a sentence, the comment goes away too. So if you've replied to the comment and been like, oh, I changed this, you delete the sentence, both the comment and the reply go away. These are not good collaborating features. I mean, I think probably Google Docs is, if you're really writing with other people, is probably still the best option, although I generally have never really been a fan of Google Docs. Just because I feel like there are more features in a desktop program that just haven't quite all made it to the web yet. All right. So yeah, Scrivener to start large writing
I
projects.
have a question about Scrivener. So
Yeah.
for me, Scrivener was the tool that did exactly what you just expressed, which is I just was able to write out of order. I had a little outline heading for each chapter, and if I decided that one chapter actually belonged at the beginning, that was at the end, I just dragged the title of that chapter in the outline to the front, and then the whole text moved with it. Scrivener has some very powerful research tools that I've never messed around with, and I'm curious if you've done anything with that. Like it has these like almost like a little bucket of stuff. It almost seems like what I've used Evernote for in the past, just kind of a
Yeah.
dumping ground for files and articles and images.
So if I were writing the Great American Novel, I might be more inclined to use that. Like I could see like if you need to describe a location and there's a picture of the location, like you're describing a place in the real world and you're trying to do it in prose, having that picture there could probably be really helpful and also inspiring, and it would be easy to have that in one place. For me, the equivalent of that stuff is going back out to previous research, and I already have all of that in papers. So I'm more likely to have papers open side by side with Scrivener than I am to use Scrivener's internal research stuff. But I will use like the corkboard view and the index card view to help structure things and to move that around more visually. I will use the distraction-free writing if I feel like that's something I need. Um, it's like, just blanks out the screen and leaves you essentially an empty sheet of paper with no interface. The other thing I really like about Scrivener is I like writing, like physically typing in the Optima font.
Hmm.
I don't know why. I just do. But everything for everywhere has to be in Times New Roman when you submit it out. So I like being able to kind of like have it look pretty in Optima font in Scrivener, and then in the compile option, it just changes everything to Times New Roman because that's what I tell it to do. Yeah, that's just a quirk of mine. I find the Optima font very pleasing to write in.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow, Papers looks fantastic. This looks like something that I wish I could purpose for more of a casual use, like for my blogging or.
Yeah, it's so tightly developed around academic articles and scientific articles that I don't know that you could.
Yeah, have you heard of Devon Think?
I have. I've never looked at it.
It sounds like there's some crossover with Papers, but maybe not quite as much of an academic focus.
Yeah, Papers is definitely like it's definitely like a niche tool. But like if you're in a graduate program, it can be the difference between like actually making sense of all of this stuff and just sort of drowning. I think, I started my graduate program. I did my master's while I was teaching. So I was at Northwestern University at the time, had a 4 summer master's program. And it was all the same faculty that were at Northwestern during the academic year. It was just as challenging and rigorous as the academic year program, but you could keep your job. And I started that program in 2003. And in 2003, for the most part, you still had to physically go to the library and find the printed bound copy of the journal that had the article that you wanted. And you had to like go pay the 10 cents to photocopy it, or, 10 cents a page or whatever, and to read it. And so I had these like massive binders from that first summer. But even over those 4 summers, by the end, so 2006 was our last summer, pretty much everything had transferred over to academic articles being delivered primarily on PDF.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was easy for me to adopt something kind of right at the time that it was all starting. So I was like, oh, I need to keep track of this. Because, it was just kind of like taking these binders that I had and finding some digital version of that.
Okay, awesome. Well, let me ask you this. Unless there are like any major apps that are supporting any part of your work that you didn't already talk about, I'm curious. Like apps, little tiny apps, utilities, things, just not things that might not relate specifically to the nature of your work, but that make
Yeah.
like that just lessen the load for you when you're using a computer.
Sure. I use amphetamine which is a replacement for an app that used to be called Caffeine to prevent my Mac from going to sleep. I use that when I'm giving presentations on battery or downloading large files or working on a statistical thing that is going to take a long time and the computer might go to sleep otherwise. I think it's really childish and embarrassing when you're giving a presentation and your computer goes to sleep. I hate that, and I feel bad for people that happens to. So I use that. I use 1Password to keep track of passwords and to generate strong random passwords. And I have that on my phone and my iPad and on my computer as well. Let's see, I'm just like going through my app list. I use Magnet which is an app, like there's another one called Moom, where if you like drag a window all the way over to the corner, it like takes up half the screen automatically. There's a feature, there's a snapping feature on Windows that replaces.
Yeah.
What else? Talked about papers. I use an app called Plex to stream video from my computer to our Roku. I actually like Roku better than I like the Apple TV for a couple reasons. So like at home, if I like download a movie and it's not through a service that I have an app for, I put it into Plex and Plex will stream it over to the Roku box for us.
Plex is my solution for having a robust video workflow on my desktop computer, but then also just making that video content sync to my devices. This is kind of nuts, but my desktop computer downstairs has, like, anytime I shoot video of a concert or a recital, I dump all the raw footage onto this giant multiple terabyte hard drive, and then I usually start a Final Cut project, but then I this is just, I don't know why it is that I just want everything to sync everywhere. I point up a Plex. Plex is basically, for those listening, is just you can launch a server on your computer that will sync all of your video and other media across your multiple devices. And I actually will point the Plex server to that folder and a couple of other folders of just ridiculous amounts of video content, and that is my video syncing solution. So if I really wanted to, if I was not finished a project or I'm editing a concert, but I'm with someone and I'm like, oh, check out my band concert from last weekend, I can just like go in and find all that raw footage.
Oh, that's kind of cool. Yeah. I've not really like looked at any of the other features besides like you can stream this to this other device that's on the same network. What else? I haven't. Okay, so there are some. Every so often, I want to play really old MS-DOS games, like the old Indiana Jones movie tie-ins. There's an app called Boxer that will like create a little virtual MS-DOS machine on a Mac, so you can play old MS-DOS games from my childhood.
Amazing.
And then what else? So I for a long time was a big fan of Sibelius, but I don't actually have as much need to use a music processor like Sibelius in my new gig than I did when I was teaching K-12. That's actually been the biggest surprise for me. I don't have as much need to like create worksheets and stuff like that. It's just that have music. It's just not. It's not a huge part of what I do. And I also like kind of got a little mad at the Avid purchase of Sibelius and how it's kind of become this sort of like giant monstrosity. So the original developers of Sibelius have a new program called Dorico that they are working on. I haven't. There's just enough that's different with Sibelius that all of my muscle memory is for naught. But I do have it, and I'm hope to learn it. The one thing though that it doesn't yet do, the one feature that at least the last time I looked at it didn't have, was the easy exporting as a graphic. Because often if I am doing something Sibelius real fast, it's just to make a music notation line that I'm going to pull into a keynote presentation for class. And that actually, the last time I looked at Dorico, it didn't have an easy way to do that. So that was a little disappointing. What else? I think that's probably it as far as stuff that I use on a regular basis. Every so often, I will make a mind map. I use MindNode for that. Sometimes just to think through presentations. Basically, I do it. I don't do it the web version where the mind map expands out in both directions. I almost always do it as like a pretty alternative for an outline. So I always have it branching down like a tree. But I will use MindNode for that. I think that's pretty much it. I have the workflow app on my phone. I don't have any workflows. I have yet to figure out, and I know you've got that really cool like start of the day, like workflow that you do when you're starting a class that opens up the various files that you need. I haven't yet figured out, and I know I probably just need to think about it, like what are some repetitive tasks that would be useful for either automator or workflow. And that's kind of why, like I said at the beginning, I don't have any automations. It's because I don't know what I do that's repetitive enough that could be programmed. And I don't know that I have the time or the energy to sit and give it the thought that it requires. But that's kind of where I am.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm going to lightning round a couple of options at you that I think you might enjoy.
Okay.
Do you use Alfred or Launchbar?
I don't. I press Command Space and use Spotlight all the time.
It works really well, actually. But if someone is looking for a little bit more than Spotlight, Alfred is really just a great way to interact with your Finder a little bit more. Well, first of all, when you search for something in Alfred or Launchbar, it remembers which things you open in the search results. So if I type in the letter, if I start to look for like a sectional document, I type in sectional. It might be like the third or the fourth hit. But once I select it, then Alfred prioritizes that search result for me. So it's usually like the top thing. So it gets to the point where I just type in Command Space S, enter, and it just has already figured out that I want the sectional document, which is pretty cool. But you can also do stuff like you can do like you can type in like move file and then type in where you want it to move. Like you can just do a whole bunch of stuff on the keyboard that you would usually do by clicking and dragging around, drilling down into folders.
All right. That sounds cool.
I'm also working on, actually I have a rising ninth grade student who is writing for me a JavaScript that will look at a folder. Like if I have a folder of band parts and I need to distribute them, it will print. I just look in the folder of band parts and I type in Command Space to launch Alfred, and then I type in print parts, and it will run a script that will print exactly the number of each part that I need depending on my instrumentation.
That's cool.
It's kind of nice. So that's Alfred. Have you ever used Tapes?
No. Tapes
is like for those moments where you need to really quickly share something that's happening on your computer screen. It's not like ScreenFlow, which is like a really robust iMovie style development video editing environment for making screencasts, but it's just this little app that runs in the toolbar, and you hold Command Shift 2 and it starts recording a part of you select a part of the screen to record, and then when you're done, you hit Shift Command 2 and it uploads that video to their website and copies the URL to that video to your clipboard. So all you have to do is just hit Command V, like if you're messaging someone a quick screenshot.
That's cool.
Pretty nice.
Yeah.
I like Tapes. Yoink. Have you tried Yoink?
Nope.
It creates a little drop zone on the left. Like if you're on a Mac and you're dragging a file, you want to move a file to some other folder, but that requires a lot of clicking. You just drag the file to the left side of your computer screen and a little drawer opens out. You dump it there and you can just kind of leave it there indefinitely until you've drilled around to the folder that you want. And then you just drag it off the little drawer. And then
okay, so I feel like the desktop also works for that.
Yeah, but this is nicer.
I have like virtually no icons on my desktop. Like none. I have a link to the Macintosh hard drive. I have a share drive that's linked to the university network share drives that we actually don't even use anymore because we also have Google Drive. And that's it. I have nothing else on my desktop.
I keep it pretty slim. The desktop syncs over iCloud now, so I'm not as clean as I used to be. I let some stuff hang.
Okay. But I like the idea of like putting something somewhere temporarily.
Yeah,
Feels like
no,
we're
all right, the desktop
floor.
works. But if you don't want to like, because then you have to like, I have this thing where I'm trying to drag a file to the desktop, but like I have so many windows open that I have to like drag it, and I leave my dock visible a lot of the time. So I have this thing where I have to find that little tiny corner of the lower right or left corner of the screen where I can see a little inch of my desktop, but the dock isn't covering it.
What about like Option+Command+H or whatever that is? Is it
What,
Option+Command+H? Hide everything except for what you're currently working on. Control Option+Command. I don't know. There's a hi- con, command.
there's something for it. I like Yoink.
All right. Okay. I'm just saying, there is a keyboard shortcut where you will hide every window except for the one you're currently working on.
Yeah. For the record, there is a cheap or free version of everything we've talked about today.
Including the desktop on the computer that you spent $1,000 on.
I think it was like $2. I think maybe.
Okay.
Here's a a music one that I think is really cool. This is a fun app that is developed by just one guy. It's called Transcribe. Have you heard of this one?
I have not.
It's similar to the Amazing Slowdowner. You just drag an audio file into it, and then it creates this little playback environment where you can slow down or speed up the recording, raise the pitch or lower the pitch by semitone. You can boost the signal so that it's louder. You can like click and drag, highlight a section of the waveform, and like just loop that section over and over again.
Yeah, that's kind of neat. There are people who do the kind of research where you interview people would actually probably be interested in that as well for transcribing text from interviews. That's an important part of that process.
Yeah, and you can, of course, can export the file. I did this thing where last semester, I had my students, I just like published to the website at the beginning of the semester like a 50%, 60, 70, 80, 90% speed recording. And every week there was a Canvas assignment that was like, okay, you're going to play along wearing headphones to the 50% speed recording. And the brass had to do it on mouthpieces because I'm mean. And and it was a pretty fascinating experiment. But yeah, that app has got
that's I can see a lot of uses for that.
All right, here, bonus app. Sounds like you use Evernote.
I do
extensively enough that this might be fun. In the there's a lost episode of season 2 where I did a note taking episode, and the audio was really messed up. So this never aired. So there's an app called Task Clone that I learned about from that week's guest, and this is an app that links Evernote to your task manager. So if you're taking a note and you're using those little check boxes, you can tag the note Task Clone, and it will like strip all of those text boxes out of your notes and like import them into your Omnifocus inbox.
Oh, that's cool. Task Clone.
It's another subscription for you.
All right.
But considering it's a one guy development team, it's not so bad. All right, I'm just yeah, it's good. I think we're doing pretty well here. A lot of really good stuff to work with here. I have wrestled with trying to keep these episodes short and sweet, but then inevitably have left a lot of stuff in. And there's been a lot of good stuff that's come up. Nearly everything that you've mentioned today is like not in my book, or at least not quite looking at it from the perspective that you are. Well, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I don't think so. I think that for anyone who feels overwhelmed by all of these things, if you've read the book and don't really think of yourself as a techie person, I think you just kind of have to figure out a way to do something that works for you. Omnifocus was developed for that getting things done method, but I don't do getting things done at all. That's not how I use the tool. Evernote I use as a repository for things. I don't necessarily use it for note taking, and GoodNotes I don't use for note taking at all. So I think you just kind of have to play around with the stuff and figure out what's going to help you and try to declutter and jettison what isn't actually going to help you. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for hanging for so long. This has been great. I'll let you know. I'm going to try to edit it by the weekend. We'll see.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks again.
So long.
All right, so long. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.